Hello and welcome to this video lecture on organizational strategy, information systems, and competitive advantage. The main topic of this chapter is going to be on strategy, and what you need to focus on is how that strategy determines how decisions are made in the organization at all levels, including your information systems. And so you need to understand your competitor strategy so you can take advantage of that or combat that somehow. You also need to think about what is your organization strategy and are you doing things to help them do that. So the key thing to do is to be mindful of the strategy and think about everything you do, is that related to the strategy of the organization, or are you doing things that are going against what the strategy of the organization is and what they're trying to accomplish. In the opening vignette of the chapter, they talk about how the company is now producing these drones and how they are manufacturing the parts, and so is this in line with their strategy of providing security? And so the question for the company going forward is are they going to get into the drone producing business, and will they start selling those drones as part of their business, or are they going to concentrate on providing that security and going into other businesses that would make use of drones in order to capture the overhead pictures of whatever they're surveying? And so you can see in this last point, do they focus or do they diversify? They could make more money if they went into these type of businesses, the agricultural surveying, any industrial inspecting, any real estate videos, and then wedding videos. And they talked about the wedding videos, that's seasonal and it's on weekends, but it is another aspect that they could focus on. So some questions that you should be able to answer by the time you finish this video and read the book is, how does organizational strategy determine information systems requirements? What 5 forces determine industry structure? That 5 forces is coming from Porter's 5 forces model for strategy, and you'll probably see it again throughout your academic career, and that relates to looking at competitive strategy. So there's different models, and one model that's been around for a long time is this 5 forces model. We also want to look at another model that determines strategy from the perspective of a value chain structure. So how do you add value at each step in your value chain, and that can be part of your strategy as well. Another area where your strategy can have an impact is looking at that value chain, and then how does that determine your business processes and your information systems? So where are you adding value? Where can you get a competitive advantage? So this is where you would go back to the last chapter and think about what are the processes within your organization, how does that information flow throughout your organization, and see if you can get a competitive advantage by either doing things better or changing your processes around. The last thing you should get from this chapter is to have an understanding of how information systems and how you use them can give you a competitive advantage. And so hopefully we'll get started here, and then you'll have a better understanding of all of this and how it is related to everything we've talked about thus far in the class, especially the business processes. So in the following graphic, this is a way that a lot of companies will go about their planning process. So they'll look at their industry structure, they'll look at their competitive strategy, They look at their value change and then how that impacts their business processes, and then they'll have some information systems that support all of this. And so if you look at this, then when we start to look at the industry structure, we can do some analysis of this. And so what you've got listed under here is this Porter's 5 forces model. We'll say more about that here in a moment. But here are the 5 forces that you want to evaluate to see how it impacts your industry structure. Once I determine my strategy, then this is going to determine my value chains. It also is going to determine my business process and then the design of my supporting information systems. So when we look at these competitive forces or bargaining power forces, some answers or questions that you need to think about is, okay, what is the competition from vendors who manufacture substitutes for my product? If the competition is low, then I can charge a higher price and be more profitable. So all of these forces, if you think about them individually, then determine how profitable you'll be, and then how sustainable that profitable will be. And chances are, if you're producing something and somebody else sees that they can produce something similar and you're making a lot of money, they're going to probably get into the same industry as you and compete, and so then you're going to lose that advantage and you're not going to be able to charge as much or make as much profit. The second force to look at is, the competition from new competitors. If there's going to be a lot of people that are getting into your industry, then that's going to have a impact on your profitability again. And then also look at existing rivals. So if that competition is high, again, that's going to drive down your profits. But if the competition is low, then from your rivals, then that's going to allow you to charge more for your product or service. Now, in terms of bargaining power of suppliers, let's say you only get a few of your items from, or all of your items from the same supplier, or there's only one supplier that can supply the items that you need. So they're going to have greater bargaining power over you, which means they're going to charge more for their items, which means that's going to impact on the profitability of how you use their items. So if you could get those items from anywhere, from multiple suppliers, then that's going to drive down the cost of those items because you could go elsewhere and get them. And so that's going to allow you to make higher profits. Now, the bargaining power of customers means, okay, can your customers go somewhere else to buy a similar product? And if they can, then they're going to force you to charge less. Otherwise, you're going to lose those customers and they'll go to somebody else that's charging a smaller price for their product or service. So when we look at the industry structure, these are the forces that you will look at that industry with, and then determine what strategy are you going to use in order to be sustainable with your profits. What are you going to try and compete with? So here's a larger graphic view of Porter's 5 forces model for looking at that industry structure and how that might impact it. So here's a table also describing those forces. So hopefully I did a good job of helping you understand the bargaining power of customers. That is, here's an example of a strong force of the customer. So Toyota's purchase of auto paint. They're a huge customer that will purchase paint in a large volume, so they can sort of dictate what that price will be or help control that cost. But if you have a weak force from your customer, might be an example, your power over the procedures and policies of your university. You know, who's the customer there? Students or faculty, and they don't have much power to change these. So you can read through these. Hopefully they make sense. If not, send me a text and I'll try and explain it a different way. If we look at this last force, rivalry, you can see a strong force, that is, rivalry is a strong force for used car dealers, because there's a lot of car dealers, and so that rivalry is high. So they're going to be able to not be able to charge as high amount of profit for that. A weak force on rivalry, who competes against Google or Bing. It'd be hard to get into that Google search engine market. So in this case, they can charge a higher profit. So as you look at this column, then, if this force is strong, you're going to be charging less of a profit. If the force is weak, you could charge a higher profit. And the force refers to these forces over here on the left. So in this slide, if we take those 5 forces and apply it to the company that's talked about at the beginning of the chapter, we see that the bargaining power of customers is strong. And so if that's the case, that means that Falcon's response is probably to lower their prices or move into other markets where they can make more money. And so the customers, they have large accounts, and so they can say, if you don't give it to me at this price, then I'm going to go somewhere else. In terms of substitutions, it's replaced the drones with web cameras, internet protocol web cameras, so they have to be connected to the internet, and that might be determined to have a medium kind of strength, that force. And so the response from Falcon Security then is to offer differentiating services like LiDAR that cameras can't provide. So a way of your mitigating that threat. In terms of bargaining power of suppliers, the example is they're increasing the cost of the drones they sell, and so it's weak. Their response is they'll make their own drones. In terms of new entrants, Amazon might begin offering package delivery and surveillance with drones that they're using, so that might be considered a medium threat. Again, their response would be to differentiate their service and move into other markets. When they evaluate their industry in terms of rivalry, a new drone company expands its operations into the state. It'd be hard for them to do, so that's weak. And their response might be to offer additional features like direct streaming video to the customer. And so hopefully that gives you an example of how you apply that 5 forces model and how it might be done with the Falcon Security Company. So the next model that we want to look at is think about your competitive strategy. So here we have a model called Porter's 4 competitive strategies. And in order for a strategy to be effective, all your goals, your objectives, and culture and activities need to be consistent, or your strategy is not going to work well. So when we look at this model, then Porter's 4 competitive strategy is to be a low-cost producer for the industry, or to use differentiation for the industry. Now, you could also be low-cost producer with a focus strategy. With a focus strategy, you're going after a certain industry segment, and then you can also differentiate within that segment as well. So when you look at Porter's competitive strategies, it's either low-cost producer or differentiation, or a focus strategy where you're focusing on either being low cost or differentiation focus. The idea here is that you want to choose one of these and not try and choose two of these or more than two of these, because you will be competing against yourself, and you won't be as effective with your strategy overall. So an example of a low cost across the industry would be, say, Walmart. So that's their strategy. So in all of their decisions and all their practices and their culture, it's low cost. So when they look at wages of their employees, it's low cost. When they look at warehousing, what can they do to make that low cost? When they look at transporting those goods to the stores, it's low cost. When you're setting up checkout lines, it's low cost. So everything they do is based on that strategy, and so they want to try and drive everything to the low cost strategy. And that's what, on the slide when I first started talking about, all your objectives, all your culture and activities have to support that strategy, and that's what you should be focused on, and that the strategy helps drive your decision making for that area. The next question we will look at is, how does competitive strategy determine your value chain? And so if you look at your value chain as an example of our Falcon Security one, we might have a small drone manufacturer value chain. So this one might be part of their value chain if they decide to go that route. So we have, one activity is acquire drone parts, then produce the drone, ship the drones, market and sell the drones, and then service the customers. Now, each of these activities requires a supporting activity, as you can see here. Right? At each stage in this value chain, you have a margin, which is the value minus the cost. You would hope that the value is going to be always greater than the cost. So you're going to get that as well in terms of these supporting activities. And then you add those up, and that gives you your total margin. Now, we also have these linkages, and these linkages are interactions across your value activities. And so this is a graphical view of your value chain. It's the activities you're doing, what sort of things do you need in order to support those activities, and each one of those things you're looking at the margin that you need. And then hopefully you have a total margin that's going to be greater than your total cost. But then go back and think about the strategies we just talked about in terms of Porter's. Is it going to be low cost, differentiation, or focus of some type? And that's what you should be doing at each one of these activities, whether it's primary activity or supporting activity. So in this slide, we have a summary of the primary activities in the value chain. So when we're getting our product or items that we need to produce our drone, so that would be our inbound logistics, since that means how do we receive, store, and disseminate those inputs to the product. Then we have some kind of operations and manufacturing. We have to transform those inputs into a final product, and then we've got to ship them out. And so again, there's probably going to be some kind of warehouse, some kind of distribution that has to be taking place. Now, along with that primary activity, we have sales and marketing. So we have to get buyers to purchase our product and then have a way for them to actually do so. So that might be web-based, or maybe somebody's taking orders over the phone, or somebody's actually going out and making calls in a face-to-face manner. So then you need to have some kind of customer service as well, where you're assisting those customers with products and any kind of problems they may be having with those products. So the next question we want to answer is, how does that value chain then determine business processes and information? So here we have an example of a bicycle rental company. So we have a great customer, we want to determine their needs, we'll rent the bike to them, and then they have to wait to return the bike and pay. So what if your strategy is low-cost rental to students? Right, so the message that might get from the customer is, you want to tell the customer is, you want a bike, you tell them the bikes are over there, they can go find a bike themselves, they come up and fill out a form, bring it back to whoever's managing the desk, and you're done, and you pay this amount. And so, if you're low cost, you're not going to put a lot of effort and other activities into each one of these parts of the value chain. It would be based on your strategy that you're doing. When you look at the supporting part of that business, under your customer, there's probably nothing going to be there. In terms of the needs, you're just going to have physical controls to prevent someone stealing a bike. In terms of rented bike, you might have some kind of printed form and some place to hold that. And then when they return the bike, you're going to have a form, and they're going to check off that it was returned, and then whether you take credit card or cash receipt. So everything is low cost. And so then if you had a different strategy, like let's say you have high service rental to business executives at a conference resort. So now, how might that initial message for a competitive strategy be? And you could see you're doing a whole lot more. The supporting businesses, you're actually, from your customers, you can track their past sales and their activities. So you're probably going to need a system that'll be able to do that. You're going to have better trained employees that can go out and use that system and help match up a bike to a customer based on their past experience, or based on their past experience. They may have liked the previous bike, they may not have liked the previous bike, and they could tell you why, and then you would make small changes. You might want to also, if this is this high-end service, some kind of automated inventory system to check the bike in and out of inventory, so you know when it's been used, how often it's been used. Maybe you're going to use that to provide some kind of maintenance service on the bikes and so on. When they return the bike, that system will also be able to be used to check the bike in, generate a payment document, and so on. And so you can see, based on your strategy, your value chain might be the same, but your activities that you're going to be doing are going to change a lot, right? So hopefully that's a good example of how that impacts on your business processes. So the next question is, how do information systems give you a competitive advantage? One way is that information system may allow you to create new products or services that weren't available before. So you have the internet now, you may be able to then reach other customers that you hadn't been able to reach before, and provide new products and services because of that. Or if you've got, they're doing a lot with cars now. They're putting in all kinds of technology. They can drive themselves. They have internet access. And so all of that technology together might be able to give you a new product or service, and that information system can allow you to provide that to that customer. So that also relates to enhancing products and services, and then it also allows you to differentiate your product or service from a competitor. So not all competitors are probably going to have cars that drive themselves, and so if a competitor has a low cost um, strategy, they're not going to spend the money to have that kind of technology in their product. Whereas somebody else that has a differentiation strategy, then they may have that system in their product. You can also think of toys. They can put internet access in a toy, and they can do interactivity through the internet because the toy and other toys don't have that ability, and so you get a competitive advantage for some time. Something I haven't mentioned is the concept of a sustained competitive advantage, and that means you have the advantage and you're able to keep that advantage over time. That is, your competitors can't produce the same product or service that you're doing at the same quality, and so you have a sustained competitive advantage. And that's what you're after. You don't want to keep having to one-up your game every time you get a little competitive advantage. Your customers comes up with something a little better, and then you've got to come up with something else. And so you want to try and think of things that are going to give you a sustained competitive advantage. Now, you might also get an advantage by looking at your processes. So in terms of process implementation, locking in customers and buyers. And the example I would use there is if you've got a new iPhone, or you have an existing phone. Well, all that data is on that phone, it's on that plan, and it's very hard to transfer that to a different type of phone. And so that's one way they lock in the customers and buyers for that product. The same sort of thing happens with suppliers. You make it too easy for them to continue business with you, and if they were to go somewhere else, it would become much more difficult. Again, you can use your information system to do that. So you could link in or give them access to your information systems where they can see how their products are selling in your stores, and then they can use that information to buy inventory for their manufacturing that they're going to be selling to you. And so that makes it really easy for those suppliers to use that information, and they may not get that if they were to go somewhere else. So then they're locked in as well. You could also use your system for barriers to market entry. So the Google and Bing examples would be great examples for that, where that system to build would be very expensive, almost prohibitive for somebody else to come in and compete against you. I think you're starting to see that with Amazon. Walmart is trying to compete with Amazon, but that's not really their strategy. But they know that people are buying more and more online, and so they've got to try and keep their customers and not lose out to somebody like Amazon. But again, that's a huge system that would take a lot of resources to build, and so that becomes barriers to market entry, that nobody else has those resources to come in and compete. Your system can also help you establish alliances with other companies. You're trading information, and so that means you can have a segment of the market that you may be able to control because of your alliances. And then lastly, your system can help you reduce costs. And that could give you a competitive advantage because that'll help you increase your profits or keep your prices low so that you have an advantage that way. The next thing we'll look at is how does an actual company use information systems to create that competitive advantage. So that information system can be used to maintain customer account data, and so the system collects that information for a company, so they're adding value there. When forms come up on the screen and the customers have to fill it out, you can have that form be populated with information that you've already captured, so the customer doesn't have to put it in again, so that adds value for the customer. In terms of having that information, you can use it for package and information delivery. And so if you're thinking about letting your customers choose when they want the package delivered and where, they don't have to have it always shipped to their home address or to their business address. And then the system can automatically generate a shipping label for that. So that's adding value into the organization that other competitors may not have. Now, I would argue that in today's world, most businesses would have this built into their systems. But the point is if you don't have this built into your system, then you're at a competitive disadvantage. And so it may not be that something you want to do, but you have to do in order just to be competitive or to maintain your competition in the industry. What I've got on the screen now is an example of how information systems could be used to support a product. And so here, this is a car rental product. Notice that if you're keeping track of all this information, then when you produce a report, you can see where the car has been, what kind of service description it's gotten, what kind of mileage it has, and so on. And so you can also track your cars and provide that information. I know that in some parts of either Europe or China, that they have trackers on their cars, and when you rent them, and if you go into say bad parts of the town or places where you shouldn't be with that rental car, they'll charge you more. And so that's another way of using that as system to generate revenue and also give you some kind of strategic advantage. Here's an example of a shipping form that the customer can use, and so just by their selection, it automatically fills some aspects of the shipment report or form that they're filling out, and so that gives you some kind of advantage if your competitors aren't doing that with their systems. Here we have another example of how to use a package delivery form. Notice that in here, the customer has the ability to be notified with an email message. So this kind of transforms the company from being a package delivery service to a package and information delivery service, because now they're actually sending an email out. Again, this can be used with your information system, and it may give you an advantage for a short time until your competitors catch up and have the same capability. But again, I would point out that if your competitors have it and you don't, you're at the disadvantage, and so you're going to have to change your systems in order to catch up. So another good reason why you want to always be monitoring what's going on in the industry and monitor what's going on with your competitors or your rivals. And then lastly, after you hit the submit button, then the system should be able to kick out a shipping label for you, and then that provides it either internally, or if the customer is needing to return something, they would have that shipping label as well. And you see this on a lot of products that you might get from say Zappos, an online shoe retailer, also from Amazon if you're returning something. It just makes it easy for the customer, and if their competitors don't make it easy for the customer, you're less likely to go shop there because of that. And that ends this chapter. Now, I've included a couple of slides in your PowerPoint presentation that deals with the ethics guide at the end of the chapter. So you may want to read through that ethics guide just so you get a feel for what kind of issues you might be presented with as a manager. And so hopefully you've learned something about strategy and how that impacts different areas of your business.